Welcome back. I'm Helen.
I'm James.
And we are global nomads. And in 2024, we sold everything we owned to retire early and travel the world full time. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. You may have heard me mention in the past that I have an autoimmune disease, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about how that impacts how we travel and how we manage it.
So I guess that's my cue to get out of it.
So, as I said, you've heard me mention before that I have an autoimmune disease. And before we left to travel, there was a few things I needed to get in order. And I tried to do some research, and that was usually about YouTube videos. And I couldn't find anything, literally anything, very much about traveling with an autoimmune disease. So I hope somebody out there finds this helpful, so I can talk to you a little bit about what I did and how I worked up to leaving to travel full time and how I manage things on the road. So first off, what is a chronic condition? What is a chronic illness? Which is what autoimmune diseases are. So Wikipedia defines a chronic condition as a chronic condition, also known as a chronic disease or chronic illness, is a health condition that persists or otherwise is long-lasting in its effects. It usually lasts for more than a year and requires ongoing medical treatment. And basically, you're not going to get better. This is something you're going to have for the rest of your life. You'll be able to manage the symptoms, maybe, but this is not something you will ever recover from. It's typically a chronic condition is something that is not curable. So within that realm of chronic conditions falls autoimmune diseases. And again, we'll go back to Wikipedia for a definition of an autoimmune disease. They say that it's a condition where the body's immune system, which normally protects against foreign invaders like bacteria and viruses, mistakenly attacks healthy tissues and organs. So for me, the autoimmune condition that I have is called psoriatic arthritis. And the arthritis bit is a little bit of a misleading, really, because it's not like normal arthritis. Psoriatic arthritis is a form of inflammatory arthritis. So basically, my immune system is in overdrive. It's attacking everything, not just the bad things. And this in turn causes inflammation in the joints. That long-term inflammation in the joints then damages those joints and causes arthritis. This is a little bit different to normal wear and tear arthritis, like osteoarthritis, that, let's face it, we all get as we get older. This is a slightly different form because the joint around where the damaged joint remains inflamed and becomes very stiff and painful. So I was diagnosed in 2022 with psoriatic arthritis. In retrospect now I know what the symptoms are. I actually think I started displaying symptoms probably around 2017, 2018. I also now believe that my mum had it and my sister also had it, both of which are sadly no longer with us, but not from the autoimmune disease, from other reasons. But I now I know a little bit more about the disease. I strongly think that both of them had it. So what triggers an autoimmune disease? Again, we're going to go back to Wikipedia and the definition there. So autoimmune diseases are often triggered by a complex interplay of genetic predisposition and environmental factors such as infections, toxins, and medications. In my instance, I actually can't think of an event that triggered it. Aside from in 2016, I actually went on vacation. I got really sick, and I came back with a bad bout of bronchitis and ended up at the emergency room. That is the only thing I could think that possibly triggered it. In addition to that, like I said, it talks about genetic predisposition. I also have hyperflexibility, so that means I have hypermobile joints. I also have scoliosis, which basically, in blunt terms, is a wonky spine. So my spine does this, like an S shape, instead of it being straight. So there could have also been other factors that could have contributed to it. You tend to find typically people with one autoimmune disease are more predisposed to having more than one as well. So who knows? Who knows? Um, for psoriatic arthritis, typically people will start with psoriasis. That would be the first indicator you would have. Psoriasis is also an autoimmune disease. Other examples might be lupus, Hashimoto's. I'm just kind of thinking the big ones off the top of my head, but there's lots of illnesses that are encompassed in the autoimmune umbrella. Typically, like I said, psoriatic arthritis starts with psoriasis, and then the arthritis develops after that. In my instance, I actually have, you can see, pretty clear skin. I have no psoriasis. I do occasionally get breakouts in my scalp, which I've never been to see a dermatologist about, but whenever I talk to them about it, they're pretty sure that that's psoriasis. But it comes and goes. It's not there all the time. I consider myself very lucky to not have any skin lesions. My sister had very, very, very bad psoriasis, and then later had some joint issues. My mom used to constantly talk about what ate, what didn't. Everything hurt, and we were just like, we're getting old, deal with it. And I feel really bad about that in retrospect, because I actually think that she probably had undiagnosed psoriatic arthritis, the same as I'm pretty sure my sister did. But when my diagnosis was made, those were the factors that were taken into consideration. For me, things started with swollen joints. So we used to run a flower shop. I used my hands a lot. Literally, I would wake up in the morning and my hands were so swollen, I could barely make a fist, and they were incredibly painful. Then my other joints started to be affected, and I felt exhausted all the time. Now, most of these symptoms were happening around about the time of COVID, so I just put a lot of it down to COVID. I was in a lot of pain, though, joint-wise, but I had also been overweight my whole life, so whenever you would go and see a doctor, you just get told you're fat, lazy, whatever. I remember sitting in my doctor's office and her looking at me and saying, "You're just basically very unhealthy," as I sat there in tears that my joints hurt so bad. And no matter how much I said to her, I've been fat my whole life, I have never felt like this. She wouldn't listen. And I think that's quite true with a lot of people with autoimmune diseases. They go undiagnosed for a long time because you can't get a doctor to listen to you. Especially as a woman, you're kind of brushed off as being, it's anxiety, you're being histrionic, whatever. We could do a whole other video about that, but I'm not here to talk about the medical profession. So it took me probably about 2 years of fighting with my doctor to get to see a rheumatologist and get a diagnosis. In that time, I gained an awful lot of weight because I literally couldn't move more than about 20 feet without having to sit down. I was in so much pain. Eventually, I actually had another bad bout of a bad cold, what I thought was a bad cold. And I had a persistent cough I'd had for about 2 months I couldn't get rid of. And it wasn't until I saw the nurse practitioner who suggested a steroid pack to check that there was no inflammation in my lungs. I took a steroid pack, which if you've ever had one, it's like a really high dose of steroids for 5 or 6 days, I can't remember now. And I took those and was like, I feel amazing. I could move. My joint pain was gone. I had energy. It was incredible. It was so incredibly noticeable that as soon as I took these steroids, I felt better. And then, of course, once the pack ended, I was back to feeling miserable again and in pain again. So back I went to my doctor and was like, hey, there has to be something to this. I took these steroids and felt great. Again, she refused to accept that there was anything wrong and that it was all in my head. She eventually did some blood work, which showed increased inflammatory factors, and still refused to accept there was anything wrong. And it wasn't until I renewed my health insurance and I could refer myself to a rheumatologist that I got to see a rheumatologist and got a diagnosis. And for any of you that have gone through this, which I'm sure there's lots of you that have gone through this, to actually get a diagnosis, to get to the doctor and them say, yes, it's not all in your head, there's something wrong with you, was an incredible feeling to have everything that you've been feeling kind of justified, that you weren't going mad. So that was how I ended up with my diagnosis. But thinking, okay, well, I've got a diagnosis, let's go on. Well, anybody that's been in this position knows that that's only step one of the process. The process then started on drugs and what drug you could find to work. So, as we said, your immune system is attacking itself, and the closest thing that you can really describe it as is feeling like you've got flu. If you've ever had a really bad bout of flu, and I don't just mean a cold, I mean a really bad bout of flu where you literally can't stand up and you feel exhausted, that is how having many, many autoimmune diseases feels, and the joint pain that goes with it. So I thought, well, that's great. Now I can have a drug and I'll feel better. No, that's not, that's not how it works. The first treatment that I started with were steroids initially, and pain medication before we moved on to biologics. Usually people will start with methotrexate as well, which is another disease modifying drug, but it also affects your liver adversely. My liver function wasn't good enough, so I couldn't try it. So I immediately went on to biologics. I did try Stelara and then several others, including Otezla. There was another one in there, but all of these were by IV infusions. I didn't actually find anything that was hugely successful, honestly. I got some relief, but nothing that really made me feel as good as the steroids. But obviously, you can't take steroids for the rest of your life either, not to the levels that I would have needed to reduce the inflammation. So once we decided we were going to travel full time, we knew this was going to be an issue, because I couldn't go for a monthly IV. So I spoke to my rheumatologist and we started to look at what other drugs I could try that may be effective and were a tablet form, for example, to make it easier to travel with. Originally, I tried Otezla, which gave me heart palpitations. I couldn't handle it, so I stopped taking that. And basically, I really begged my rheumatologist to let me try methotrexate because it's cheap, it's readily available, and it's usually known to work. So when we left in April, I just started methotrexate. Now, as a backup plan, we'd kept our insurance running, our US health insurance running for the remainder of that year. So we left in April and it was going to run until December. I'd already had long conversations with my rheumatologist and we'd agreed we could do telehealth appointments, especially as I was going to be in the US traveling for the first couple months that we left. I started on the methotrexate and it worked amazing. I felt the best I felt in years. The fatigue was reduced, the joint pain was reduced. It felt wonderful. However, my liver did not agree. And no matter how much I begged her to let me stay on it, she's like, no, this is not a good idea. So I had to stop taking it. At that point, we moved to sulfasalazine, which is known not to be that effective, but I needed a tablet form and something that was readily available. As we mentioned in a previous video, I tried to get approval for a couple of other tablet-based drugs, but I couldn't get my insurance to cover it, one of which was Skyrizi, I believe, from memory, and my insurance company wouldn't cover it. At that point, we had also discussed Rinvoq, because that's a tablet, but it's very expensive. But keep that in mind, because I'm going to come back to Rinvoq. So I tried the methotrexate, it worked, but I couldn't take it. We moved on to sulfasalazine. And I continued to take that for a few months. In that time, I had blood work done in the US. I managed to have blood work done in Alaska just before we left. And I had blood work done in Palm Springs when we were there as well. The sulfasalazine was okay on my liver, all my functions were good, but it wasn't initially having much effect on my inflammatory markers. So we continued to take it. By that time, I'd gone to the UK. I was able to see a doctor in the UK privately, which cost me about £40 for a half-hour appointment, and I had some more blood work done there, which cost me about £100. That I could then take that blood work that they gave me the information on, send that to my rheumatologist in the US prior to me having my appointment with her. Everything was okay. It was just okay. My inflammatory markers were coming down a little bit, but not drastically. But if you've ever taken any of these drugs for any kind of autoimmune disease, typically you need 3 to 6 months for them to reach their full effectiveness. So it was still early days. I had blood work done again in Verona. I was able there to see a doctor, again, like a virtual appointment, because I needed to get a prescription. And in the EU, you need an EU prescription. So I had this appointment, told them what my rheumatologist in the US had said, and was able to get a prescription from them. This prescription I could then fill basically anywhere in Europe, so it was good for not just Italy. I refilled it in Austria, and also in Turkey as well. Although sulfasalazine you can buy over the counter in Turkey, and they pretty much said, "How many do you want?" So I guess the point is really, you can access drugs, you can access doctors. I also had a prescription filled in the Czech Republic, which did mean I had to go to the hospital. But again, it was easy to get, fairly inexpensive, and I got the drugs filled there. For example, the sulfasalazine for a month's supply in Europe was about 25 euros. I think it was cheaper than that in Turkey. And all the time, like I said, I'm still in touch with my rheumatologist in the US at this point. When we left the US, we had originally planned to come to, it was always in our long-term plan to come here to Kuala Lumpur, which is where we are now, to have an annual medical assessment. For those of you that don't know, it's easy to get medical assessments done here. People tend to come here or Thailand. We went to Prince Court, and we're going to have that in a future video, how that went. But I had always planned to come and see a rheumatologist in March, which is where we were when we got here. So I was able to speak to my US rheumatologist all the way up till December, and then come and see a rheumatologist here in Kuala Lumpur in March, and that was always the plan. I had one last bout of blood work done in Dubai, where we were just before Christmas. And typically this was really just to check my liver function, my kidney function, and inflammatory markers. By Christmas, when I had the blood work done in Dubai, my inflammatory markers had come down slightly. So we're like, yeah, fingers crossed the sulfasalazine is working. In January then, we'd moved to Sri Lanka, and I managed to throw myself down some stairs. Not on purpose, obviously. Did a pretty good number on my ankle, and ended up in a boot. I'd also managed to hurt my arm and other stuff. It was a pretty bad fall. So, of course, that threw off all my inflammatory markers, and had been a bit of an ordeal since then. I did go to the hospital in Sri Lanka. Again, it was a very good experience. I was seen quickly. I went to a private hospital, was seen quickly, had a number of tests and a boot, all for less than $200. By the time we got to Kuala Lumpur, my inflammatory markers were really increased. A lot of investigative work later, we then found out my ankle was actually fractured, which didn't show up until it was on an MRI. Because the type of fracture it is, it wasn't going to show up on a normal x-ray. So there was a lot of inflammation in my ankle, but this time I also had a frozen shoulder. So I think my inflammatory markers were off. The rheumatologist here, though, has been exceptionally thorough. And had me in, gave me some IV steroid treatments, gave me some IV pain medication, and we did various x-rays and stuff. Now, it all happens much, much faster here in Malaysia. It's been inexpensive compared to the United States, but it still costs quite a lot. But I have found out a lot more answers. I had various other x-rays and MRIs done. I knew I've always known I had issues with my back, but in the US, it was always like, oh, you've got back pain, right, live with it. I know now from the treatments here that I have spondyloarthritis in my back with some stenosis. So that means that the vertebrae are starting to fuse. I've got a bulging disc. I've got a fair amount of degeneration in my back as well as my neck. There's osteoarthritis in my hips, my ankles, my knees, you name it, there's osteoarthritis. which, if you have an autoimmune disease that affects your joints like this, you get used to living with pain. I honestly can't remember a day I didn't live with pain for probably, I don't know, I've always had issues with my back. 20 odd years, probably longer, but I've always had issues with my back. And we'd always put that down to the scoliosis. But some of it now is obviously degeneration. I have a big issue with my left hip too. Again, there's inflammation in my hips and in my low back. I also have a big problem with my thumb. I've got a lot of basal thumb arthritis. I did go and see a specialist about that, and the only way to alleviate some of that is with surgery because it's bone on bone, which I'm not going to do for now. So the healthcare here has been very responsive, it's very affordable, and I have now been prescribed Rinvoq. And I'm able to buy Rinvoq here for about $500 a month. If we compare that to the US without insurance, it's like $6,500, $7,000 a month. Even in the rest of the world, it's over $1,000. Now, is that going to be painful to pay for? Yes, absolutely. If it helps, then yes, it's worth it. We'll see. I'm in about 6 weeks in, and I go on Monday to see her to check levels, and we'll see how it's working. My anecdotal feedback would be yes, it's helping. I definitely feel like I've got less joint pain. There's still good days and bad days. It's still very early days on. That's just the way life is. I'm not sure that will ever change. But I do feel like it has alleviated at least some of the inflammation. My biggest indicator is usually my hands. At one point back in 2022, I actually had to have my wedding ring cut off because my hands were so swollen. There was no way I could get it off. And now they're loose. That said, I've lost a fairly significant amount of weight as well in the last year as well since we've been traveling. So we're going to see how the Rinvoq goes. Like I said, I have an appointment on Monday. Interestingly, when we were in the US, my insurance company wouldn't cover Rinvoq. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes. I'm hoping that after 3 years, we finally get to move forward a little bit and not just rely on pain meds all the time. And honestly, a lot of the time, pain meds do very little to alleviate it. When we left, we really had to make a decision though about, well, am I just going to not go and let this rule my life and wait until I get to feel better? Or are we just going to go for it and manage it? And the honest answer is we went for it and decided somehow, some way we'd manage it. And there's a few things that we do to be able to do that. Now, I will add, I have an amazing partner, and he's very supportive of this and very supportive of me and looks after me very well when I'm having a bad day. To give you an idea, in January, we were in Sri Lanka before I fell down the stairs, and we did a 4-hour tour in a tuk-tuk. And I was like, it's a city tour in a tuk-tuk, how much bad can it be? I won't have to walk a whole lot. It'll be fine. Well, we did that 4-hour tour. We got in and out the tuk-tuk half a dozen times, whatever it was. I got back to the hotel and was absolutely wiped out. Like wiped out to the point I didn't move for the next 36 hours off the sofa. And that's just the way it goes sometimes. So I did want to share a few ways that we try and manage things. So as I mentioned, when we first left, we set off at quite a pace. We were doing a lot of fast travel. By the time we got to Europe, I'm like, oh, I'm exhausted. I can't do this. I was really, really starting to feel it and be like, I'm just not enjoying this. I don't want to do it anymore. I'm in too much pain and I'm exhausted. And so we knew we needed to slow down. We had already planned in to slow down. We were moving fast through Europe to basically get to a cruise that we had booked that left from Rome. In retrospect, we just moved too fast. We were moving every 4 or 5 days, and that's just too much. I can't do it. And that's one of the lessons we've learned. So we do move a bit slower. We build in rest days. So we might go out and do something every other day, sometimes not even that much. If I'm having a bad day, it's like, okay, I'm having a bad day. I'm just going to sit on the sofa all day. And it's really hard to get your mindset into not beating yourself up about that because you're somewhere new. And especially if you enjoy traveling, the whole point that you're there for is because you want to go out and see things and do things and experience things. And then I'm like, no, we need to sit in the hotel and have room service because I'm just too tired to go out, or I'm in too much pain. Um, we, if we are going to go out and do things, we try and minimize walking sometimes. I do use a walking stick sometimes, not all the time now. I'm trying to not use it as much, but I do have a walking stick I use sometimes. Helps me with balance. Not that you'd know it after I fell down the stairs, um, but I do have. It does help me with my balance sometimes. It's like a fold-up travel one. So I use that sometimes, and we will do things like we would have always in the past used public transport to go everywhere, especially now here in Asia we're using Grabs. We've been to actually Kuala Lumpur before and we use the public transport extensively, but it means I've got to walk down to the place where we can get on the train and then walk the other end and walk in between, and sometimes just walking at the place I get to can be hard. So we do use Grabs now a lot more rather than public transport, and that's been the same in Europe and in the UK as well. So it's a more expensive option, but it makes my life a little bit easier. When we are traveling by plane, I will now often ask for wheelchair assistance. Especially we've transited Dubai. If you've seen our videos, we've transited Dubai quite a few times, and it's a huge airport. And I never exactly know how I'm going to feel when I get off a plane. Depends if it, even if it's a short flight. Sometimes whenever I get off, I'm stiff and it takes me a little bit to get going. Sometimes it's worse than others. I never know how I'm going to feel. So I just give in now, and I'll take wheelchair assistance. And I used to feel really guilty about it because I think, oh, there's people that need it more than me, and I see old people walking and stuff, and I'm like, you have to get yourself into that mindset of I'm going to take help if I need it, and if I can. And we had one issue last year. We were flying in Chicago last year, the first couple of months we left, and even though we were flying in business class, there was a really long line for security, and we stood in the line for security for about over an hour, maybe like an hour and 15 minutes. I was really, really struggling to stand. By the time we got through security, I was in so much pain. We tried to walk to the lounge, and I got to the lounge, and I don't know how I got there. I really don't. I was like sweating. Everything hurt. I felt nauseous from the pain. I got there and sat down, and I looked at James. I'm like, you have to go and ask for a wheelchair for me to get to the gate. I can't do it. Even after I've sat down for a while. By that time, things had inflamed and flared, and I'm like, there's no way I can deal with this now. And I gave in and got a wheelchair. And it was after that incident that I started to ask regularly for wheelchair assistance. I don't like to do it, but I just don't know how I'm going to feel, and I don't want to feel like that again. So that's one of the things that we do as well. When you travel full time, it can be hard to eat healthier as well. So we do prioritize that. So even if we're in a hotel where there's a massive buffet breakfast, which there usually is, we typically only have like Greek yogurt and fruit. Since we left, I've lost about, I don't know, 70 pounds, I guess, in the last year, since we actually left Florida. So it's not always easy, but it can be done. There's also certain foods that can or they think can aggravate a flare. So like a lot of sugar can aggravate a flare of your symptoms. So we do try and prioritize trying to eat healthy, even if there's lots of really tempting things on offer that maybe are not so good for you. I always have a stash of painkillers with me. I always have a little supply in my bag, some in my in my carry-on luggage. I always have painkillers everywhere, some in my camera bag, so that I've always got some ready and with me. One thing that the doctor has given me here in Malaysia is Lacoa patches, which I think you can get them in the US as well. I haven't seen them. I'd only seen light lidocaine patches, which never really seem to do a lot for me. These Lacoa ones, those seem to really help, so I'm sure they will be coming with me and be part of my everyday carry kit as well. As well as I've already mentioned, building in rest days. Don't feel bad if you don't feel up to doing something. It's just life. That's just the way we have to live. Rest and don't aggravate your symptoms if you don't have to. One of the early mistakes I made as well is I booked a Airbnb in the UK last year and did not realise it was upstairs. It was above a shop in a high street. The location was great actually, but the pictures didn't make it obvious. He's actually changed the listing now. The pictures didn't make it obvious that it was upstairs. And we got there and I'm like, I got to keep going up and down these stairs, and stairs are harder for me. So mistake there. Don't book an Airbnb with stairs. We also booked a hotel in a place called Ella in Sri Lanka, which is a very mountainous area. And I also specifically look for now, especially if we're staying in a smaller hotel of a few days, do they have an elevator? Because not all hotels do, especially in Europe. Make sure that your hotel has an elevator. Don't get caught out like I did with your Airbnb either. One other thing that I travel with is a travel hot water bottle. It's like a little mini baby version. It's only about this big and has a little cover. I got a pack of 3 of them on Amazon. Heat pads often really help me with various joints. And I also have an ice bag that I travel with as well. So they're a little bit odd to travel with, but I do. And I also always make sure I have things like socks to keep my feet warm if my ankles are hurting as well. So sometimes you are going to need some extra things. I also just bought a massage gun here in Malaysia. Part of the physio that I've been having on my frozen shoulder was like one of those pounding massage guns, and it's really helpful. And actually I found it really helps my back too. So it's a little bit heavy to carry, but it definitely helps. So that's going to be another thing I take. If you are thinking about doing this and have an autoimmune disease though, or any kind of chronic illness, if you are able to get onto a specific set drug regimen, especially before you leave, it will make your life so much easier. It is possible to see doctors around the world. It is possible to get blood work done. It is possible, I think, is the biggest thing I want to kind of put over to you as much as I can, is it is possible. The big thing is that I think we feel is that you have to take responsibility for it though. You can't rely on a rheumatologist or a GP or someone who's maybe only just met you for the first time. They're often shocked when I go and I say, okay, well, I guess you want to know what my ESR is and what my CRP is and how does this drug affect my liver function? I've done much more work to be much more responsible for myself, to know what can and can't work for me. I also always Google a drug they give me. So in Sri Lanka, they gave me a painkiller, and I always Google what they are before I take anything. And I found out this particular painkiller was not approved in the UK or the US, so I didn't take it. I'm sure it was probably fine, but I am always a little bit aware of that too. So I think you definitely have to take more responsibility to be your own advocate for your own health and be prepared to put more legwork in. But the bottom line is, it's possible. You can do it if you really want to. So guess who's back?
I've been allowed back.
It was a bit self-indulgent. I've spent a lot of time talking about me. And I'm always very conscious of how this affects James as well, in that I often do feel that I'm stopping him doing things, and that we don't do some things because I don't feel like it or because I'm not physically able to. And I would never want to feel like I'm holding him back in not doing the things he wants to do, and having to put up with me going, oh, this hurts, that hurts, oh, I'm tired, oh, and feel like you're constantly complaining, because that is how I feel. I honestly, I feel like all the time, so I'm telling him something hurts, to the point where if he's like, "Are you okay?" and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine, yeah." And I'm not normally, but so I wanted to ask you how you feel, what it's like traveling with someone.
Oh, it's a right pain in the arse. No, I think if you're going to go on this journey and you're going to make a decision to do travel, it's going to make everything that bit harder, but it doesn't stop you from doing anything. So there's always challenges, whether it's an illness or whatever. It's not the hardest thing in the world, and it's not the easiest thing in the world. So um, you need to embrace it. You choose to travel with the person. I wouldn't choose to travel with anyone other than Helen, and we're going to do this. This is a challenge that comes up as there are going to be many, and we're going to tackle it together. And sometimes that means that we have days off. We make changes to our plans. We accommodate each other, such as things like Grabs or Ubers as opposed to public transport. We're also try and do as many big things as we can. For example, Galapagos. We went with a Galapagos tour, which is going to be this time next February, which has got easy access on and off the Zodiacs. So that was a consideration. And also doing them now rather than doing them in 5 years' time, when things may or may not be better or worse. Who knows? Getting them out and done and seeing these things. I don't think it's ever going to stop us from doing, perhaps going to a place. It might stop us from doing some of the activities when we get there, but that's, I'd rather get there and do some things rather than get there and, the one thing about travel is, if I could have done this in my 20s, then it would have been absolutely fantastic. But as with life, in your 20s, you've got your health, but you've got no money, you've got to work, and everything else. And now we're in our 50s.
And things don't work.
And things don't work.
Not just us.
But we've got the money to be able to travel. We've done our work in life, we're retired. So you've got this kind of split that you want your health when you're in your 20s, but you want your money when you're in your 50s, and that just tells me that life's too short, and even if you're not quite at the number you need to be at, you need to get out and do those things, because I think if you'd have been stuck in the flower shop for another 5 years, I'm not sure
I would have lived another 10 if I had.
I'm not sure how that would have gone. So I think that you have to work as a team, and you have to be not afraid to say, do you know what? Today's not a good day. And sometimes I can look at Helen and know that even
we're not doing anything today.
Yeah. Helen will say, no, I'm fine. But honestly, you can look at her and she's not fine. So sometimes you have to have things that are fixed and you're going to do them that day. And then some days, well, do you know what? Let's just do it tomorrow. Let's do it the next week. And go with it. Being flexible is, you're retired. Being flexible is part of this. So
even if your body isn't flexible.
Or hyper flexible.
Oh yeah, or my hyper flexible in my case, yeah.
Prioritize your health. Prioritize what you can do. Get and do as much as you can, but also know your limitations and work together.
So I hope I didn't waffle on too much there, and some of that was useful. I know when we were looking to travel, I wish I could have seen someone that was doing it and said, "Oh yeah, look, you can do it. Oh yeah, these are the things you can do." So I hope if just one person out there found this helpful, then good. I'm glad.
I hope that one person likes and subscribes.
So thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.